French American Foundation for having me today, and the Ford Foundation, and for giving me this amazing fellowship and the opportunity to do the reporting that it allowed. Immigration is, as Jim pointed out, is often thought of as very narrowly a border issue, and that is an important part of the issue. You know, hardworking people streaming across the southern border, and the U.S. national security state, wastefully and quixotically attempting to stop them. And that was my first exposure to the issue of immigration, spending a bit of time in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, about a decade ago. But what I really love about this fellowship and the different projects they chose, including my own, was that it allowed and encouraged a much more complicated and broad look at immigration in the United States and throughout the world. It's not just an issue of people coming here. It's about the global economy changing. It's about the movement of capital or money throughout the world, and how that has changed in the movement of people or immigrants. And those two things are very much related. For my project, I got to work with a really amazing photographer named Zoe Strauss, and we worked in Philadelphia and Detroit. And the idea was to look at how immigrants impact deindustrialized cities that have lost industry, that have lost jobs, that have lost population over the last half century. In Detroit, when we think of Detroit, there are kind of two dominant ideas. There's the idea that a lot of people have left, and that's true. Detroit has lost well over half of its population, and has miles and miles and miles of the city that is defined by just fields or abandoned houses and burnt out houses. But the reason I decided to focus this on Detroit is something that was really notable from my earlier visits to the city was, wow, like there are an enormous number of immigrants here. Immigrant communities are really one of the defining features of the city, and it's not something you ever hear about Detroit. First of all, just across the Detroit border of Southwest Detroit is Dearborn, Michigan, which is the Arab American capital of the United States. And I think a lot of people know that Dearborn is kind of the capital of Arab America, but it's not way out somewhere else in Michigan. It's in Metro Detroit, right across the city border. And it is that process of Lebanese and Yemenis and Iraqis and both Muslim and Christian moving to Dearborn in particular, and Chaldean Catholic Iraqis moving to Dearborn in particular, and Metro Detroit in general, has been going on for many, many decades and continues today. And what I looked at for the Atlantic magazine's Cities website was in particular how those communities have become such an integral part of the fabric of Metro Detroit in the sort of bizarre situation after September 11th, when right-wing anti-Muslim people just started showing up protesting in Dearborn all the time, just because there were a lot of Muslims there, and how the community there, including their Irish Catholic mayor, the Irish Catholic mayor of Dearborn, really came together to say, no, this is not what we're about. You guys are completely out of touch. Then the second thing in Detroit I looked at was Mexican Town, which is probably one of the most stable neighborhoods in Detroit proper. It's in Southwest Detroit. It's been a heavily Mexican neighborhood for many, many decades. The big thing I drew from that and from Dearborn is that while so much of the discussion about immigrants in the U.S. is about it sort of immigrants invading or overwhelming or being a burden, I mean, Detroit welcomes as many, can use as many immigrants as the world wants to send in its direction. There's room for a million more people in the city. And then in Philadelphia, I did something a little different, which was kind of look at some stories that are stories about immigrant communities, but not necessarily completely about immigration. One, I looked at a conflict between Vietnamese Buddhist, lay Buddhist Buddhists and a monk in a monks association that's in fights with monasteries, with Buddhist lay people from Vietnamese all over the country over control of temples. It's a really weird controversy that would be hard for me to summarize here. And just sort of the banality of that, although it does very much tie to roots in Vietnam, I think these are immigrant stories that are very banal and American in some ways. And then the second one was on Millbourne, Pennsylvania, which is the smallest town or one of the very smallest towns in Pennsylvania, right across the Philadelphia border, Millbourne Borough, population about 900. It's also perhaps believed to be the first and only Indian, like as in India in the subcontinent, Indian majority municipality in the United States. And the story that I reported there was about how the South Asian newcomers formed an alliance with liberal whites in the town to overthrow the Republican political establishment in this really small, teeny little town. And it was just a funny story. So yeah, thanks so much to the French American and Ford Foundations. I think this is really important, both the work that's being done on the border and reporting on these stories throughout the world. So, thank you.